Welcome to our first workshop slash panel of GauntletCon 2019. So thank you everybody for coming along. So I guess the way that this works is I've got my screen shared so that I can show you some stuff. I'm going to talk a bit about my approach to cartography, my thoughts on map making and so forth. If you have questions, comments, whatever, you can put them in the workshop channel on the GauntletCon Discord, and I will check that from time to time and try to respond to that and so forth. And so I'm gonna talk a bit about map making, and then we're going to create a map together. So for that, I'm gonna be looking for input from all the folks watching this. I want it to be kind of an interactive thing. So for those, again, if you've got ideas, responses to the kinds of things that I'm asking about, you can put them in that workshop channel on the Discord. Okay. So first, just a little bit about my background. So I'm a professor of geography at Slippery Rock University. I have a PhD in geography from Clark University. I've been teaching here at Slippery Rock for this is my 11th year, so I have some kind of academic background about maps. And then I also run Mapsburg, which is my Etsy shop where I make maps for people. And you can see one of my maps is kind of backdrop to that, the title slide there. That's Auckland, New Zealand. So if we scroll down to my next, I had to do this with a PDF because I discovered that my tablet doesn't have all the fonts installed that I used when I created my PDF the other day. Okay, so first I want to talk a bit about kind of orienting what I'm talking about when I talk about making maps. Because there's a lot of map making advice and tips and ideas out there, and I want to kind of structure it, I guess. So there's kind of three levels of map making advice that you'll run across. So some of it is what I think of as geography advice. So this is really advice about how to create the territory that you're going to depict in your map. And I should say as well that, you know, for the purposes of this workshop, I'm really focusing in on geographical maps, so maps that are maps of some space or place that people are living in. And a lot of discussions of maps often start getting into, you know, other sorts of diagrams that we can think of as like metaphorical maps, like relationship maps and so forth. But you know, because of my background and area of expertise, I'm going to focus on sort of non-metaphorical or classic geographical sorts of maps. So geography advice is really world building advice about creating the place that you are making a map of. And so you're designing the geography through the process of making a map of it. So that's things like, you know, very common geographical map making tip is like rivers always flow downhill and the tributaries come together, but it doesn't split apart. You know, something like that. That's really a statement about how rivers work. And so the reason that your rivers on your map shouldn't split apart as they flow is because rivers in the real world and in the world that you're creating for your map don't split apart. So that's kind of geography advice. Then there's cartography advice, which is about if you've got some territory that you're dealing with, some world you're trying to map, how do you actually translate that into the form of a map? How do you represent that geography in this, you know, usually two-dimensional format? And then the third level is what I call illustration advice. So you want to put something on the map. How do you actually draw it, right? Like how do you draw mountains that look cool and that look properly like mountains? You know, how do you draw water so that it looks like water, and what are some of the different styles you can use for depicting water. And these days there's a whole bunch of different programs out there that can help you with that illustration step. So, you want some mountains here and you're not real good at drawing mountains, but you can just kind of click and the program will add mountains there for you and stuff like that. So, those programs have really facilitated that illustration step. And I do get asked sometimes by people for like reviews or advice on those different illustration programs that are out there. And unfortunately, I never have any good advice because I personally enjoy the illustration process so much that I've never used any of those programs because it takes all the fun out of it for me as a cartographer. But those kind of things are out there. There's also lots of illustration advice if you want to do your own illustration by hand. So we've got kind of those three different levels of advice you might have about making a map. And so for this workshop, I really want to focus on the cartography level. So I'm not going to talk so much about how to, create a plausible world to make a map of. I'm not really going to get into the nitty-gritty of how you actually draw things on the map. And in fact, in our kind of interactive workshop portion, I'm going to, be really... I'm not going to be to the same standards of illustration that I would be if I was like doing a project for a client or something, because I just want to we're going to want to get the ideas down and see how it comes together. And I'm not going to worry about making everything look, super fancy. So I want to focus on the cartography part, in part because I feel like that's often overlooked. I think there's a lot of advice out there about geography, a lot of advice about illustration, but people sometimes miss the cartography step. And as someone with a academic background in the discipline of geography, who's spent a lot of time thinking about cartography, I feel like that can be a missed opportunity. And that if you think a lot and think carefully about the cartography aspect of making a map, you can often get something much cooler than you would have if you tried to jump straight from geography to illustration. So my perspective on cartography, kind of the basic principle of cartography, which is something that I try to impress upon my students when I teach about map making in any of the classes that I teach here at Slippery Rock, is that maps are always selecting, simplifying, and distorting reality in order to serve a particular purpose. So when you're making a map, you have a reason that you're making a map. You have something that you're trying to do with that map, and that drives decisions about how to select what things you're going to show, how to simplify the complexity of the real world, and which distortions you're going to accept and which ones you're going to avoid. And this is not because map makers are like jerks and want to mislead you. And it's not because we're just not very good at maps. It's because those are inevitable and necessary things to do to make a map of the world. A map can't show everything. You have to pick what it's going to show, but you have to think about that choice and what is that choice doing in your map when you pick to include one type of feature and not include another. When you pick a cutoff for whether you're going to show something or whether it's too minor to care about, you are making a choice when you decide how to trade off between the different things that you might want to put on your map. And so you have to pick which distortions are going to be okay because they don't defeat the purpose of your map, and which ones are not okay. And so every map is selective, every map is distorting things in some way, but it's for a purpose. And you can't really understand a map without understanding the purpose that it was made for. Why are we making a map in the first place? What role is this map going to serve? Who is it for? What's the intended audience? Those are all important questions that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about making maps. So in the context of role-playing games, since that's what we're here for, there's, as I see it, kind of three different types of maps that we can have, or 3 different places that maps can come into games. And sometimes the same map can play multiple roles, but the way that I would kind of distinguish this is, first, you could have the map can be the text. And so when I say the text, I'm thinking of what we talk about. If you've played a lot of PBTA games, you hear a lot about the fiction, right? That as we're playing this game, we are creating a story together, almost like we're writing a novel or something. So we have this fiction that we're generating within the play. And so in most cases, the fiction exists as talk. We're telling the story through all the things we say sitting around the table or sitting around our StreamYard broadcast for an online game or whatever. And so the fiction consists of all of this talk that we do about the game. You have in a LARP, the fiction also consists of acting and movement and all those other things that also are part of the story that's being told. If you have an epistolary game or a play-by-post game, the fiction gets written down. Obviously, those other kinds of fiction get video and audio recorded, different formats that this fiction may exist in. And so a map is another format that the fiction might take, that we might be creating a map together as our way of telling the story. And so on the slide, I know it's really small, that can hardly see it there, but I've got some text there, but then also a map as text that I created in a game a little while ago. We were playing The Companion's Tale, and so it's a map making game. There's a number of other ones out there. The Quiet Year is probably the most famous, and so we were drawing a map together as part of how we were telling this story about this hero and their companions. And it got to be a pretty busy map. As you can see there, we had a lot of information we were trying to put on it, but that map is sort of one form that the fiction we created has. So that's one level where you can have a map. Another level that a map might exist at in a role-playing game context is as a paratext. So a paratext is an aid to the people engaging with the fiction. So it's an aid to the GM. It's an aid to the players. It may be an aid to the audience. If you have, if this is like a live stream or an AP podcast, and so you have people that are just listening later, they may want to use a map to help them follow what's happening, right? And to know where the characters have gone and understand, okay, why do they have to go to place X in order to get to place Y? And you can see it on the map. Or, the GM might use a map so that when the players say, oh, we want to go to place X, and the GM can figure out, okay, well, can your enemy get there before you? What's the distance? And all those kinds of things. So if a map is being used as an aid to the people creating and or consuming the fiction, then the map is, we called it a paratext, aid to the players, to the GM, to the audience. And then the third spot that a map can fit into, the third role the map could play in a role-playing game, is as a dockeme, which is a part of the story itself. It can exist inside the fiction. So that would be a map that the characters actually have access to, and the characters can look at it and read that map. And you may make a copy of that map for the players to look at. So then that map, it's a dockeme in the sense that it's being looked at by the characters, but then it's also simultaneously a paratext helping the players to play characters who are looking at that map. So it can function on multiple levels. And so a good example of that might be something like Thror's map from The Hobbit. So you've got that map, and you as the reader can look at that map as a paratext as you're following the story and seeing, how are they getting into the Lonely Mountain. But then it also exists inside the story, right? Thorin and Bilbo and Gandalf actually have that map in their hands and are looking at it and are using it to help them to get inside the mountain. So another important thing to think about when you're dealing with maps in a role-playing game context is which of those levels is your map existing at, or more than one. What is your map doing? Who is using that map within the context of creating the story together in your game? Okay, so then if you're creating a map, there's questions that I think are useful to ask yourself, and they're questions that I like to ask if somebody commissions me to make a map. I've done maps for a number of games and for a few novels, and kind of some of the same stuff kind of applies there. That if I really want to be able to really think through graphic choices that go into making a map of a area, whether it's a real one or an invented one, some of the things that are good to ask about. And these questions are going to be kind of the framework for the interactive portion of this workshop. Is first, who's making this map? Who is creating this map, and what's their background, what's their biography, what's their position in the world, where are they coming from? And so, that gets a little meta when we're talking about maps that are existing as texts and paradigms. We want to understand maps don't just fall out of the sky. Maps are made by somebody. Then second, what's the map intended to be used for? So, like I said, every map is made for a purpose. And it may be a very general purpose, there may be multiple purposes, but there's some reason that this map is being made. No map can serve all purposes equally well. And if you try to do that, then you're going to end up with a map that doesn't serve any of your purposes very well at all. So anybody making a map, once you've established who's making this map, anybody making that map is going to have a reason that they're going through all of this trouble, and that is going to affect the choices that they make about how to represent the geography that they're thinking of. Then third, you want to think about their goals or their agenda. Right? People have ideas about the world that are going to influence how their map is put together. People have social or political agendas that are going to affect how they draw things. Which things think are important enough to put on the map, which things they don't think are important and deliberately or inadvertently leave off, which things they, or how they represent certain things. So, a classic example is if there's a disputed boundary, how is that represented on the map? There's no neutral way to represent a disputed boundary. If you draw it according to one side or the other's favoring that side, but even if you draw it as a disputed boundary and mark it disputed, and you put both sides claim lines on there as like dotted lines or something, that's still taking a side. You're not siding with either of the two major disputants, but you are essentially sending the message that there's some sort of legitimacy to this dispute, that there's that this is a dispute we should care about, and that we should acknowledge the existence of these alternative claims, which that in itself validates both of those claims on either side. So there's no neutral way to represent things on a map. So you have to understand the map maker's goals and agenda to understand how they would put things on the map. Then you want to think about what information the map maker has about the world that they're representing. And it's easy for us living in the 21st century, where we've got surveillance satellites going around all the time. We've got the internet where we can easily look up information. It's easy to think in terms of we have all this information, we know everything, and it's just a matter of how we represent it. But that's not necessarily the case, even in our world today, much less if you're working in the context of a more like, say, a medieval fantasy kind of setting. You're playing something like D&D, and the people making that map a lot about certain things, and they're not going to know very much about other things. And you want to think about which things would they know about, how would they have found out about those things, what would have been the biases and agenda in how that information was brought to them. And so a classic example of this, if you look at older maps, sort of medieval and early modern maps made in Europe, look at the Caspian Sea. The Caspian Sea in real life is sort of elongated vertically, or north and south. But on these maps, it's always this nice east to west oval, because they knew something was out there. They knew there was some sort of sea out in that general vicinity, but they clearly had no clue any more detail than that. And so they stuck it on there in a nice looking shape that was similar to what they'd seen on other maps. And that was all the information that they had about that place. So you want to think about what information the map maker has access to, what might be the holes in their knowledge. And it's sometimes very interesting to make a map where you've deliberately left certain things out that maybe you, as the but your world, your person you're impersonating as you make this map, wouldn't have known about those things, or wouldn't have had the same information about it. And then lastly, the map maker's technical capabilities. You can make different kinds of maps with different kinds of tools. A map that is being carved on a clay tablet versus a map that's being painted on a paper or papyrus scroll versus a map that you're making with futuristic level GIS software. Those are all going to be different maps. They're going to look different. They're going to be able to show things. There's certain sorts of levels of detail, ways of presenting information. If you're have a printing press, that changes how you can make your maps, what kind of stuff you can put on there, how you want to present stuff than if you have to copy it by hand. So all those technical questions can also come into the presentation of your map. So does anyone have any questions that you want to share before we get into the interactive part of this? Give everyone a minute if you have any thoughts you want to type in again in the workshop channel on the GauntletCon Discord server is where I'll see any of your questions. Okay, I see somebody typing, so. So just while you're putting in questions, I'll just tell you a little bit about how the interactive portion is going to work when we get to that. We're basically going to take those questions that I've got on the screen right now and kind of go through them to create a map. And I'll draw it, but I'll be asking those questions of all of you in the audience to put together our map that we're going to create. Okay, so the question, how does proceed map fit into this, e.g. Quiet Year and Companion's Tale? So I think all of these are good questions to be thinking about if you've got what I call the map as the text, where the map is one of the forms that your fiction takes together. And Companion's Tale is actually a great example. It's one of my favorite games, and one of the things that's really cool about the Companion's Tale is that it really emphasizes the idea that different people are going to have different perspectives. Different companions have different ideas about the hero. So, for folks that haven't played the Companion's Tale, it's a game that's about telling the story of some sort of, kind of mythic hero and their adventures and all the things they did for the land. And but you're telling it through the points of view of the various companions that the hero has had. That there's the hero might have a mentor, and they might have a rival, and they might have a lover, and these other kind of roles of their companions. And so the companions tell pieces of the hero's story that they experienced. And the game really emphasizes the idea that different people tell the same story differently. And so unlike most games where you're supposed to kind of yes and everything everyone else says and accept it as canon and build on it, in the Companion's Tale you can explicitly disagree with what other players have said, and that's totally fine. And those two disagreeing perspectives, one person says that the hero was a selfless martyr for the land, the other person says the hero was self-serving and conniving, and those can both coexist. You can have disputes about the facts, and it's all just fine. And so that comes into not only the spoken part of the fiction as you tell the stories, also during the game revise that map and change it according to how the companion that they're playing would see the world. And so all these questions that I'm suggesting to think about with map making are great questions to be thinking about if you're playing a game like the Companion's Tale, when you're thinking about, okay, so I'm going to add X to the map. I'm going to add the castle where the hero was imprisoned to the map. Well, how am I going to put that on there? What actually goes on the map? And is the castle even the best thing to put on the map to represent this episode in the hero's journey, or is there something else that should be really going on this map that's more significant and conveys the idea better? Okay, and then next question that I see here: how do you establish a sense of purpose, tone, and fiction shared by the whole table when a game expects everyone to contribute to the same map, but they're not exactly tools for that? Legacy games and Quiet Year come to mind. So I think in a context like that, you just kind of have to talk about it. And I think you should explicitly bring up these ideas. Talk to your players in the same way that you have conversations about tone and content with the spoken parts of the fiction, and you talk about, do we want this to be a wacky game, or is this going to be a more serious game? Do we want this to be, what kind of themes do we want to incorporate? Do we have lines and veils? All those kinds of things. If it's a game that relies heavily on map making, then I think you want to talk about those things. Well, you want to talk about the tone setting as you're putting the map together, just as much as in your spoken narration. You can and it is, you mentioned there's not being tools for that, and I think that is a thing that might be interesting to do from a game design point of view, is to design a map making game that really explicitly had constructs for that in that, because we do spend a lot of time doing spoken kinds of fiction or written kinds of fiction as game players, and we develop some skills on that level, but we don't spend as much time as map makers and using other forms of presenting that fiction. Okay, so we have those two questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move on to the interactive portion here. But if other questions come up from anybody watching this, can work those answers. What I want to do, let me see if I can share a different screen here so that I can start drawing some stuff. Okay. So, quick question. Can everybody see? Okay, it looks like the screen share is a screenshot of StreamYard window. I'm trying to share my drawing program because the interactive section won't work very well if I can't share my drawing program. Again, share screen. Sketchbook. Okay. Sorry about that. It doesn't like me to share that screen for that program. Let me get a different program going here. Let's see if it'll let me share that program. Okay. Now the other program is choking when I try to start it up. uh, okay. Let's go to backup plan number 2 here. Sorry, I tested the screen share at the beginning when we were getting set up, and I didn't realize that I needed to test it for different programs. Some of them would share properly and some wouldn't. Yeah, because Sketchbook doesn't want to share. GIMP freezes every time I try to start it up on my tablet here. But let's do this. Sorry about this, everyone. Okay, so we are going to try this. I had I said that this is a talk about cartography, not illustration, and we're really going to dig in on that because I've gone to my third backup option, which is it's a Google drawing where I cannot do very good illustration at all. But we can still make a map. We can still illustrate some of these kinds of ideas that I'm talking about, even though it won't necessarily look pretty. Okay, so moving on to our interactive portion of our talk here. So I want to kind of go through some of these questions and see how a map can come together out of asking some of these questions. So for simplicity's sake, let's think in terms of a map that that's a docking map, so a map that exists within the world that we're telling a story about. And just to kind of get us started all on the same page, let's say that we are in kind of a D&D-esque medieval fantasy kind of setting, roughly speaking. Just so we're kind of envisioning sort of vaguely similar. So let's get some ideas if you want to throw them out into the chat there. Who's making this map? Who would be an interesting sort of character to have making a map? Like what's their background? What's their sort of social position? Does anyone have any ideas? Who would be cool to have as a map maker? Pirate map. Okay, that's our first suggestion. That sounds good. Okay, so making the map. So let's flesh out our pirate a little bit more. Okay, we also have a suggestion of a dragon surveyor. What do you think? Let's combine those as a pirate dragon surveyor. So tell me a little more about our pirate dragon surveyor. How did they get into the pirate dragon surveying business? I'm kind of envisioning that they're maybe dragons are a big threat to pirates, and but also a big opportunity. Pirates like gold and so forth, right? And dragons have a lot of that, and so pirates need to figure out where the dragons are on their map. What do you think? How do people feel about that as a premise? Pirates reporting on the Navy and strongholds of the Dragon Empire. Okay, yeah, that sounds awesome. Okay, so good. So we've got our got an idea of who we are and what the purpose of this map is, right? There's a map to help the other pirates understand where the Dragon Empire is, and so that's that's both threats and opportunities for these pirates. And so with those ideas in mind, where my thoughts are going then is that so on the one hand, this is then going to be a map that's very very centered on the Dragon Empire. There may be a lot of area that the pirates operate in that's just going to get left off this map, whether it means it's because it's too far out from the boundaries of the map, or just we're just not going to put on here because it's not as relevant. You're not going to pull out this map until you are tangling with the Dragon Empire. So the Dragon Empire is going to be kind of at the center of this. So let me just put that on our map. Make that text nice and big here. Oops. Okay. So we got the Dragon Empire, but it's also, I would think, going to focus on the coastal areas of the Dragon Empire and any islands that they control, because that's where our pirates. I'm sort of taking the liberty of assuming that we're dealing with our classic kind of seafaring pirates here. So let me see if my pen will work on the Google drawing here. Yeah, so let's just sketch out some coastline here for the Dragon Empire. That didn't seem to work right. That disappeared after I drew it. There we go. Okay, so we've got some coastlines. So we'll sketch in a few of the features that are part of the Dragon Empire and its immediate surroundings. So we've got a coastline, and there's a nearby archipelago. So we've got some of these things going on, and I just accidentally opened the shopping app, and I don't know how to get rid of it. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we've got a few islands in there. So another suggestion, maybe isolated islands outside the typical dragon flight paths and with dangerous weather. Okay, good. Yeah, so one of the things that our pirates would be worried about from the Dragon Empire would be the flight paths of the dragons. And so why don't we say that, so let's add some flight paths here. So that would be one thing. The pirates are going to be worried about the dragons flying, kind of flying overhead. And let's say that we've got kind of the main territory of the Dragon Empire, and sorry, and we've got kind of a major flight path going this way, another one kind of going, another one going kind of there back to the starting point, that due to the winds and in this area, it's easy for the dragons to kind of make this a sort of circular path. So those are our dragon flight paths. And let me select these and make them a little more notable. And where's the color thing on here? Sorry, I haven't drawn much in Google Drawings. There, line color, the one that says line color. And so let's make the red because they're nice and threatening here. So that's one thing we want to watch out for, is those flight paths. Then we also want to note these dragon strongholds. These are the major spots that the dragons would be landing in. And let me just pick a nice little shape here. We'll pick the no symbol to represent our dragon strongholds. And we will fill. What am I doing there? I'm not trying to comment on it. Select it, change the fill color. Let's make that red as well. So we definitely got a dragon stronghold there on that island they're visiting. Let's put a couple on this other island. Let's put one on the coast there. So now we're seeing areas for our pirates to avoid or to seek out, depending on what their dragon-related agenda is. And then let's put another one. So let's, if we start to add some backstory to this this place, because we do have to build our geography at the same time, because this isn't a territory that we've created before. So let's put a no symbol, but in gray right there. We've got a former dragon stronghold on that island, as well as that island and one over here. So these are areas the dragons used to control, but do not anymore. Okay, so a question of the flight path specifically in those directions, or do dragons fly in both directions along the lines? So my thought in drawing them as arrows was that the dragons tend to fly in a particular direction around this this bay, so that you'd usually see dragons going in a certain direction. But that's one of those things, right? The maps always simplify. We're not showing every path that every dragon might take. And so a pirate reading this map that sees that arrow and says, oh, we're only going to see dragons flying along this particular path in this direction is going to be potentially in some trouble if they take the map too literally on that count. Okay, so we got a few other suggestions coming in as well. Dark clouds and lightning. Okay, yeah. So there's going to be, we've got the dragons as one hazard, but then we have weather as another hazard that might also affect our pirates. And so let's that we've got. I'm not going to get too deep into kind of the geography, world building aspects of this and worry about how plausible this is from that point of view. But we've got let's put kind of a region of clouds that represents kind of a zone where we see a lot of storms. So kind of along this line here, you get storms. Very often, let's say they're coming up out of this southern sea. Let's say there's just a place that allows, so we got a lot of there, but then they also kind of come up between that southern island and the rest of the land. So you have to watch out for storms through the center of this area as well. Okay. So, and then there's also a mention of strongholds, the ports where the ships carrying tribute to the dragon hordes stop. Okay. Yeah, so that's a good idea. So if this is a situation, the dragons are not just going out and stealing treasure, they're also there's treasure being brought to them by kind of vassal states or people seeking tribute from the dragons. So, or seeking like protection or just not getting destroyed by the dragons. So let's just use the little sun icon here. Make that kind of a gold. And so let's say there's one tribute port here on this island. And oops, copy the wrong thing. Can we copy the tribute port? Okay, and then maybe there's some others on the mainland here. And then there's probably one on that island as well. And so then that makes me think another thing that our pirates might be very is these tribute ships are taking to get to the Dragon Empire, because as a pirate you might not be up to stealing from the dragons, but maybe you want to steal from the people bringing the dragons tribute before they get there. And so just looking at this map, I'm thinking maybe these tribute ships are coming in from kind of the north or northwest direction. So maybe a tribute ship route would be maybe something like that, coming to that one. And let's make it a different color so that we can tell them apart. Let's use that, say, a gold color. Gold tribute ships. Oops, I just made another arrow there. So let's that one. So then some of the tribute ships come to that island, and then we've maybe got some coming over to that island as well. And so the tribute ships are kind of steering clear of the stormy area in the center as they come to our dragon empire. And then we'll put let's say the main There's routes down to there from kind of both. Oops. Let's accidentally moved that thing. Okay. And, if this was anything other than Google Drawings, I'd make these routes a little more complex here. But okay, so now we know where the dragons can be found. We know where these tribute ships are sailing. Okay, so we're starting to get a sense now, I think, or at least I am, of the world that we're working in, but also the perspective that the pirates are taking. Right, this isn't just a pure world building exercise. This is also helping us to understand, what the pirates are scheduled time. See if there's anything else we want to that we want to add to our pirate dragon map. Maybe a place important for the pirates, but now lost, but honored in remembrance. Okay, yeah, that could be good. So what I'm thinking now is, so perhaps this is a place that the pirates know of, but they don't know quite where it is. Maybe this is a place that was lost long enough ago that they kind of know that it existed. That's a place that's in kind of their lore, but they're not entirely sure where it would be, but it ends up going on all of their maps. And I'll use this little lightning icon for this, and it's something that, because it appears on all the maps, pirates are often going looking for it. So let's make it really tempting for our pirates. Let's say it's at this kind of here. So this is an area. It's a little bit outside of the current domain controlled by the Dragon Empire. And in fact, let's get a let's make a line to represent the official boundary claimed currently by the Dragon Empire. Let's say the Dragon Empire recognizes that they have lost some of this territory there. Let's say they still kind of stake that island, de facto have lost it, but they kind of recognize that they don't have these other two islands. So that's the boundary line as claimed by the Dragon Empire, and we'll put dotted line there. So we've now got kind of a tempting situation for our pirates, because the fabled pirate stronghold is technically within the Dragon Empire, but seems clearly in an area that they might not have full real control over. But our pirates themselves are going to have a base, and the pirate base will be, let's say the pirates are based on this island over here. So that makes stuff real interesting for them, because to get to the fabled base, they're potentially crossing through several dragon flight paths. They're going past some dragon strongholds, also crossing a lot of shipping lanes for the tribute being brought to the dragons. They're crossing not too far from this stormy area. So that can make for some real interesting adventures for our pirates. Okay, so we are just about the end here, and I want to set a good example for our future workshops this Gauntlet Con by ending nicely on time. So thank you so much to everybody who was listening. Thank you to those of you that gave some suggestions and input on the workshop channel. If anyone has any questions about cartography that you're interested in asking later on, I'm always happy to chat about it. You can find me in the Discord and DM me during GauntletCon. You can find me anytime on Twitter. It's at Chef Stentor, ChefSten. And I'm happy anyone. So thank you, and I think we'll sign off the broadcast then.